My name is Greg Jones. I'm the director of the Division of Business, Communication, and the Environment. I've been a professor here also in the Environmental Studies Department since 1997. I want to welcome you to the Wine of Southern Oregon event that we have this evening. This is just another step in the development of the Southern Oregon wine industry and engagement with SCU, the Hannon Library, and others. In the last 10 years or so, we have seen a lot of developments that have happened both within the wine industry and through SOU in our library here. And many people have contributed to that, and you're going to hear more about that as we go through the afternoon. Most of the information is also there in your program. There's some background on our collections and how things have been developed. But what we're here to celebrate today is the development of a Wine of Southern Oregon digital collection. This collection was really spearheaded by Mary Jane Cedarface in terms of being proactive about getting engaged with the wine industry and doing some work here. But it was also funded by the ERATH Family Foundation, which is a foundation that supports wine industry endeavors throughout the state. I'm a board member, and we were very happy to help fund this development of this collection. So I'm kind of wearing a couple of different hats here, but very proud to have been a part of this. I'm going to act as your MC. I don't have much more to say than what I've just gone through, but I'd like to introduce Dr. Susan Walsh, our SOU Provost and Vice President for Academic and Student Affairs, to welcome you to SOU.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Greg. Greg wears many hats. One of them is professor here at the university. We're always very excited at the work that he's doing in the community and in the state and in the country and internationally, so thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that this event is happening. I know many people have worked very hard on getting us to this evening. Thanks to Mary Jane for being very involved in this particular digital collection. I love this. It's wonderful. And on behalf of the SOU administration, we just welcome you all to this evening. And I love the setting. This is so cool because I'm always here for meetings, and there are rows of chairs. This is like coming into the Hannon living room. It's very cool. The bistro tables, we just need a fireplace right here, and that'd be perfect. So, anyway, thanks everyone for being here, and I think it's going to be a great evening, and really invite you to just take part in all the good things that are out here. And I'd like to introduce our new university librarian, Jeffrey Gayton, who would want to say a few words of welcome, and so Jeff, come on up.
Jeez. Thank you, Sue. I do still continue to introduce myself as the new university librarian, even though I started in July. I still haven't figured out exactly when I have to stop saying that as an excuse for being new. But I thank you for coming, and I want to thank, this event is here to honor the Southern Oregon wine industry, but also to honor their commitment to help work with Southern Oregon University and Hannon Library to help preserve and document that history and keep it through our digital collections. So thank you very much for coming.
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers this evening. The first speaker is a gentleman that I was very fortunate to run into early on when I first came here to work at SOU and get engaged with the wine industry. He has been very instrumental in developing and being a partner with SOU in terms of our wine library collection. So I'd like to invite Will Brown to come up and speak to us about his endeavors, and I appreciate all the work you've done, Will. It's been such a pleasure to work with you, and he's got a wealth of history to talk about this industry.
Yeah, in 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes.
Okay, Greg, thanks for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for being here. I really appreciate it. Anytime I get a chance to talk about wine, I'm always ready to go. Before I get really started, I'd like to thank Maureen Battistella for a couple of things. First of all, she sort of rekindled my nascent interest in Oregon wine history, which had been gone nascent for a couple of years until she came along. And I'd also like to thank her for creating this, this PowerPoint presentation. We both worked on it, and she did the PowerPoint part, so thanks again. I've been around a long time in Oregon, in Southern Oregon. I came here in '79, and I started looking into the wine industry right off the bat. But at that time, there were only 2 wineries, and one of them was way out in the Illinois Valley. That was Siskiyou. The other was Valley View in just out of Jacksonville, Rouge. And I've seen it grow from 2 wineries up to I don't even know how many now, because every time I look at the numbers, they're different. We have something probably over 50 wineries now in the Rogue Valley, and that includes a lot of virtual wineries. I'll come back to that in a little bit. Peter Britt was the founder of the Oregon wine industry in the 19th century. He was an immigrant from Switzerland, and he was accustomed to drinking wine from his home country. And so when he got here in about 1852, he set about to plant a vineyard. He saw the local wild vines growing, and he knew, or he thought, that he could produce a wine from the European grapes in the Rogue Valley. He bought mission grapes from California, which was about the only thing he could get his hands on at that time. And he planted the first vineyard about 1855. As mission is a very heavy bearing grape, for those of you who don't know. So you have mission grapes, you're going to get a lot of wine. And he had more wine than he could handle, so he started selling it. And long about the early 70s, after the Civil War, the government finally caught up with him because he was selling wine and he didn't have a permit. He didn't have a license to do that. And so they wanted him to pay back taxes, which he ended up doing. He decided at that time that he would just get a name for his winery and go ahead and become a commercial winery, which he did, and he called it Valley View. No relation to the current Valley View. Here's a couple of pictures. The one on the left is Britt's home. And as you see, there's a vineyard in front of it. And this is where these are the mission grapes which he made wine from. On the right is one of his vineyards, and I don't know which one it is exactly, but I think it's the one over off of Old Stage Road, just out of Jacksonville. He planted about 10 or 15 acres over there, and when he did that, he imported, not from Europe so much, but a lot of the grapes came from California. He imported a lot of Vitis vinifera from California. He got them from Charles Wetmore. And he planted them in this new vineyard, which he had out just outside of Jacksonville. Well, here's Porter. You're going to hear from him a little later, and I hope I don't say something about him that isn't true. But Porter was a professor of horticulture at Oregon State University. And in 1962, he came to the Southern Oregon Research and Experimental and Extension Service Station. Porter came from Yakima, and he thought that the climate here was pretty much the same as in Yakima, Washington. And he also knew that Walter Clore from Washington State had done experiments in planting and growing Vitis vinifera in Washington, which were successful. So Porter went up there and talked to Walter, and he came back with the idea that he should start an experimental vineyard at the extension station, which, if you don't know, is just outside of Jacksonville. So he did that. He planted an experimental vineyard, and he planted mostly, or I think all, Vitis vinifera, and those wines were made and proved to be successful. Most of them, not all of them, were successful, but it just showed that Vitis vinifera would grow in the Rogue Valley. Porter was very important in supporting the local industry, which was just getting underway. There were half a dozen of wine growers about that time in the early 70s, many of which they all wanted to get started. Very few of them knew anything about planting grapes and growing grapes for winemaking.
That included me.
Well, you knew about the grape growing. Anyway, Porter was very, very strong in supporting the local grape growers, and gave them a lot of help. He also gave them cuttings, and or sometimes he sold them. And in my opinion, and I've held this opinion for a long time, Porter is the father of the modern wine industry in Southern Oregon. Thank you. Frank Wisnowski was perhaps the most outspoken of the new people in the Valley in the early 70s. He came from a career in engineering, and he had lived in California, around in Northern California, and he wanted to plant a vineyard. So he moved here when he heard that this was a pretty good place to grow grapes, or he thought it would be in any case. He was a very charismatic person, and he was influential with the local people, and he was also kind of their leader. In 1972, he planted, I said the first Southern Oregon vineyard on the slide, but I'm not exactly sure of that. There were 2 or 3 others that planted grapes right about the same time. But he was one of the first. And by 1978, he was ready to bond his winery, which he also called Valley View. That's another story, and I won't go into it because of time limitations. Frank Wisnowski was an engineer, and he helped build the Lost Creek Dam. On his last day on the job for Raymond International, he was doing a dive, and because he was also a professional diver, and in addition to being a contractor, he never came back from the dive, and his body was never recovered. Well, this was in 1980 during the summer, and following that, there was a 5-year period during which virtually nothing happened at the Valley View Winery, or anywhere else for that matter. There were people still growing grapes, but nobody was making wine. In 1985, his oldest son, Robert, who's seen on the left, graduated from Oregon State. Now, he couldn't have been more than 21 years old, but he came in and he took over the operation of the winery. He made a lot of enemies because he canceled contracts right and left, because Valley View was hemorrhaging money by that time. They hired John Guerrero as the winemaker. John came from Davis, and he's still there, believe it or not. 30 years later, John is still the winemaker. So Bob and John were in charge of the winery for about 5 years, until the younger sons started to come. Mark was the first. He's the second from the left. And then Michael came a few years after that. The winery is still going. It's thriving. It's under the leadership of Mark and Michael. Robert is in a different business. Here's Dick Troon. Dick was an early grape grower. He had a farm out in the Applegate, and he decided, and you can see in 1972, he was another one of the first people to grow grapes. Dick decided that he wanted to learn more about viticulture, because none of these people knew anything in 1972. So he went to Rogue Community College, and he asked them if they would put on a class for viticulture, grape growing. They said they would if he got 12 students and an instructor. Well, he did get an instructor who was Charles Corey. I'll come back to him in just a second. And he got 9 students. I call that the class of 72, although it doesn't mean much to anybody else. I've run that by a few of the winemakers, and they don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, Charles Corey was, again, in my opinion, he was the father of the wine industry in Northern Oregon. He was a Pinot fancier. And he came and he instructed that class at Rogue Community College. He also sold a lot of vines because he had a nursery up north where he grew the vines. In 1993, Dick opened a winery. Here's Ted Gerber. Ted was from California. He'd worked at a wine bottle factory down there. Decided he wanted to make wine, so he came up to Southern Oregon. He looked all around. He got a lot of statistical data, and he decided the Illinois Valley would be the place to go. He planted his first, he planted a commercial vineyard in 1975-76 in Illinois. He was the first. He established a winery in 1979. Sarah Powell became his winemaker in 1991 and stayed for 9 years. There will be a little more on Sarah as we go along. Presently, Brian Wilson is the winemaker at Forest, and Brian will come up again. There's a lot of interaction in the wine industry in Southern Oregon, a lot of people moving around, and they all know, everybody knows everybody. Here's Del Rio, which was a real, almost a shock. Some investors from California bought the old Del Rio pear orchard out by Gold Hill, just north of Gold Hill, between Gold Hill and Rogue River. This is an example of pears, of going from pears to grapes, and I'll talk about that again. In 1997, they developed what was at that time the largest vineyard in the Rogue Valley with more than 100 acres. That overwhelmed the whole industry in the Rogue Valley, and of course there were only a few wineries at that time. They couldn't possibly take the grapes. So he sold grapes in Northern Oregon, and he also sold grapes in California. At that time, Randy Gold, who's here tonight, there's Randy right over there. Randy Gold supervised the planting of this very large vineyard. Down below you see on the left Rob Wallace, who's the managing partner for Del Rio, and then Randy, and then Brian Wilson again. So Brian has been one of the longest tenured winemakers in the Rogue Valley, and one of the very best as well. In 2001, they opened a tasting room, and in 2004, they opened the winery. They're perched on the edge right now of planting about another 200 acres, Randy? Yeah, 200 more acres. That'll give them over 300. Okay, here's Greg, and everybody has already met Greg. Greg went to the University of Virginia, where he earned a PhD in environmental sciences with emphasis on atmospheric sciences. He wrote his PhD dissertation on climate and viticulture in Bordeaux. He joined the faculty here in 1997, and within the first few months, he gave a lot of talks. He gave one here on the campus that I was at, and then he also talked to the growers in the area. And it's my hypothesis, and Greg emphasized, since he was an expert in climate and viticulture, he emphasized the fact that we were probably growing maybe not the right grapes here. Everybody was planting, anybody who planted a vineyard planted the same thing. They all planted Cabernet, they planted Chardonnay, Merlot, a few planted Sauvignon Blanc, there was some Zinfandel, and probably a handful of others. But Greg held the idea that this wasn't the right climate for all that. And he felt that we should be growing grapes that come from warmer areas in Europe. That would include Spain, southern France, and parts of Italy. This would include grapes like Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre, and many others that grow in a warmer climate. Over the years, Greg has remained here at SOU and he's now professor of environmental sciences, among other things. He's also managed to become the authority in the world on climate and viticulture. About 2 years ago, Decanter magazine named him one of the 50 most influential people in the world wine industry. He's very, very accomplished. Here's Roxy Ann, and Roxy started in 2002. It was the first, this is another example of going from pears to grapes. The winery started at the historic Hillcrest Orchard in Medford, and it was the first urban winery in Southern Oregon. The winemaker there, the first winemaker there was Sarah Powell, and Sarah made the first vintage at Roxy Ann. She couldn't make the second one because she was ill, and she died prematurely in 2004, but she was a very striking person and a very accomplished winemaker. On the left is Jack Day, the owner, and in the center is Michael Donovan, who came to Roxy after it was only about a year old. He eventually assumed the management of Roxy Ann and became the marketing person. Don and Trouty Moore came from Southern California. Don was an internist at USC Medical Center. They bought a property on Rapp Lane in Talent in 1989. There were a couple of acres of vineyard there at that time which were poorly taken care of. And he straightened that out and began to add more vineyard property. So much that by this year, he's ended up with over 300 acres. He also used a unique process in getting up to that point. He leases a lot of the land just from ordinary people who have enough room to plant a small vineyard. And so he's got many, many small vineyards around that he's leasing. He also owns a lot of them. His wife, Trouty, has helped him all along the way, and their son, Michael, at the lower right, is now managing the vineyards. Don is perched on the edge of adding another 200 acres down the way on Wagner Creek Road. That's going to give him about 500 acres. He's by far the biggest wine grower in Southern Oregon, or at least in the Rogue Valley. Cowhorn Vineyard and Garden and Farm was established in 2005 by Bill and Barbara Steele. They're very important. They're small, but they're very important because they're the first biodynamic vineyard in Southern Oregon. I'm not going to go into biodynamics in a vineyard because it would take up way, way too much time. It's a very interesting process. And it makes the vineyard and the winery part of a larger entity called a biodynamic farm, in which there's all kinds of little animals and other crops are being grown. In addition to being the first biodynamic vineyard, they're certified by Demeter, which is the certification agency. Both the vineyard and the winery are certified. And they're also a certified organic vineyard. That certification was done at the same time as Demeter. The first winemaker there was Linda Donovan, and we'll get to Linda in just another minute or two. I also wanted to mention that the wines from Cowhorn have received very high scores in wine publications, including Robert Parker's Wine Advocate and Wine Spectator. Here's Linda. Linda's a veteran winemaker who graduated from Davis. She came to Oregon about, I don't even remember, 2003 or so. She's worked for several wineries in the Rogue Valley, including Agate Ridge, and a few others. And she was the first winemaker at Cowhorn. In 2009, she established the Palette Wine Company in Medford, right in the center of the old part on the west side of Medford. She took a historic downtown warehouse, and in 3 months she made a winery out of it. I think that that space was 20,000 square feet. She's just added another 10,000 square feet because she's one of the largest wineries in Oregon already. She appeals to the custom crush crowd. These are people who own small vineyards and want wine made with their own label. So they are what we call virtual wineries. They're not brick and mortar wineries because they don't own any winery. She makes the wine for them. They put their label on it and they market it. She was the first major custom crush operation in Southern Oregon. In 2011, she produced over 27,000 cases of wine, which placed her as the 20th largest Oregon wine producer. She has a lot of labels, as you can imagine. She has her own label called Linda Donovan Wines, plus all these virtual wineries. And I don't even know how many there are. At one point I heard there were 20, and then another point I heard there were 30. It could be any number because it keeps changing. Linda's also a very good winemaker. Okay, World of Wine. World of Wine is an event. Many of you have probably been there. It was founded in 2003 by 3 people, mainly Lee Mankin, who's in the center of the picture on the lower left. But his friends Joe Genet and Cal Schmidt were also involved. And it started out as a fairly small event, and it kept growing. For many years, they held it at Del Rio Vineyards, way out in the middle of the vineyard. In 2007, Les Martin came along. Les is a partner with his wife Rachel in Red Lily, which we have over here tonight. And Les kind of kicked it up a notch by getting judges who came from all over the country, and many of whom were masters of wine. This is the highest certification you can get in wine tasting. In 2011, World of Wine moved from Del Rio over to Jacksonville, and Lee Mankin dropped out for reasons I'm unsure of. Last year, and in 2011, the festival moved from Del Rio over to Jacksonville. In 2014, the Asante Foundation took over the whole operation of World of Wine, and the proceeds are going to go to the Children's Miracle Network. That's the end of my talk on milestones. And again, I want to emphasize that these milestones were my idea as a sort of wine historian. And obviously I missed some people. There are people who could have had more coverage or even been included as being very important. And so we want to recognize a number of individuals, wineries, writers, festivals, and associations. And this is the list that we came up with. So that's my tale for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. Will made a statement early on, I think, that is very much true to my heart as well, and that is that our next presenter, Porter Lombard, is the father of the Southern Oregon wine industry. For me, when I came here, I knew I was coming to a place that was new and fresh and growing. But if I needed to know anything about what was going on in the wine industry in Southern Oregon, all I had to do was talk to Porter, because he did everything that I needed to know to start out with, and it also meant that I didn't have a lot of things I needed to do except carry on the work that you started. So I appreciate it very much, and I welcome Porter to come up and talk to us.
Thank you, Greg. He's an important person for us here, and I would like to, I had a whole list of things that I was going to talk about, but I don't think, I might just mention a few things. When we planted our first plot there at off of Hanley Road near Jacksonville. Why? The extension agent at that time couldn't believe that we were planting the wine grapes, and these wine grapes are mainly like Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Cabernet, and that we're planting. They're just 6 varieties. And I got my information, as Will mentioned, from 2 places, or one. The first one I visited was in Prosser, Washington, with Walt Clore, who had quite a history of with the wine industry there, and of course was an important person. And what I was interested in is to find out if we could even grow it, the grapes here in the valley, if we matched with their climate. And I figured, well, we have a slightly longer growing period than they do in Prosser, and particularly Prosser had every deep freeze every other year on the average, whereas we were something like 1 in 10 years here in our valley. So I figured we had a chance, and then I spent time in Davis to see what they suggested. They said, stay away from heavy clay soils. Well, of course, we're famous for the heavy clay soils here. And I found that, of course, Napa Valley had clay soils too that were deep and very vigorous. So I figured that we can get by with it here. But when we planted our plot there in off of Hanley Road, we had, as I said, the Extension Service sent at their pair researcher, or I should say, extension agent out to watch the planting of them. And of course, we just used 6 just cuttings. At that time, they decided that we could get by with the cuttings without the rootstocks. Now, rootstocks are important in the wine industry because of the insect pests. The phylloxera is a real problem with particularly the European varieties if they're used without a rootstock. Anyway, when we planted, he said, "My God, I can't believe that you're planting these varieties here, the wine grapes here." He said, "I grew up in Napa Valley, and this is no Napa Valley." Well, I think the way I look at it, this is much better than Napa Valley. There's certain. Well, I have a chance. I don't need to reminisce that much, except there's another. I think Will Brown had wondered why it took, a couple decades before we could really match some of the wines that are being grown elsewhere. And of course, as he pointed out, there wasn't any of us that were well educated for wine grapes. And the wine grapes, I spent at least 13 years out of Corvallis working with the industry up in the Willamette Valley. And of course, that gave me a good start. And the thing that we were able to do is to highlight the value of the industry there in the Willamette Valley for the rest of the world. And we put on what they called a Cool Climate Symposium. Now, looking at the industry here in in the valley with the heat values. I think this year you had something like 3,700 heat units this season. And I can't believe it's up that high. We were concerned, particularly in the Willamette Valley, that we only had just slightly less than 2,000 and didn't know if we could mature the varieties when we first got started here. So, and the Medford area was considered warmer at 2,700, I think. So I'm surprised that it's jumped that much. Just one more thing, I'd like to introduce you to the new viticulturist at the research station on Hanley Road. He's a graduate, or I should say he's a PhD from Cornell. I have a great respect for the University of Cornell for some of the people they have produced. Nelson Shawless was their main character and viticulturist in New York, and I think I learned more from him than I did from anybody from Davis. So I'm not trying to shoot down Davis, but anyway, I'd like to introduce Dr. Vinay Pagay from. Can you raise your hands, Vinay? And we hope the best to him, and it's been wonderful to talk to you, so thank you.
I'm Mary Jane Cedarface. I'm so glad you're all here. We're going to try to wrap things up pretty quickly. I just wanted to spend a moment to tell you about our collection and to introduce the person who's done all of the digitizing, Shayna Sandor. We've had, in your program, you can see that we've spent over a decade trying to collect books and journals and other materials. We now have about 1,600 volumes. And then the Wine of Southern Oregon is our latest venture, and we really appreciate everyone's support for this, and SOREC, the Extension Center, and all the cooperation we've gotten from wineries and the winemakers and growers. So we are up to over 500 digital items. With our grant, we had said we would put in 200, and we've more than doubled that with the grant money. So we have one new feature that I wanted to highlight, and before that, if you want to get to any of our collections, take the postcards. We have a lot of them, and if you want more for your tasting rooms, we can supply them. But the URL to get to the digital collection can be found there. And this is the collection, the landing page for it. The items on the top are just randomly selected. The ones on the right are the most recent additions, and Shayna is going to show you her latest creation. And then after that, our university librarian will wrap up with some acknowledgments.
Hi, so I'm just letting you know about our newest feature. So basically you can get to it from this landing page. It is our map of Wine of Southern Oregon. So basically any item we have in our collection from any of the various vineyards and wineries, we've created a Google map that will map them. So if anybody ever wants to take a wine tour, they have a map ready to go. So it can be found here on the landing page in the About This Collection section, and it will also be consistent throughout the collection up at the top menu here. We click on one, and it gives you the name of the vineyard, a brief description and history, and then a link directly into the collection, as well as the latitude and longitude. If you click on the link, it takes you to all the items in our collection from that vineyard.
Okay, so just to wrap up, I have a few thank yous and acknowledgments. Dr. Barnard Smith and his wife Betty. He's the author of the Applegate AVA. In addition to thanking you all for coming, so in addition to thanking you all for coming, I'd like to acknowledge some of the folks who have made this collection and this event possible. Great digital collections are always about a partnership between the community and the library that's working on the collection. And sometimes the community is a local group, sometimes the community is a national group, sometimes the community is an international group. In this case, I think what we have here is a local group that has had national and international importance. So I think it's very important to recognize that. We have a couple of certificates to present. Some of the members of this important community who have helped make the Wine of Southern Oregon digital collection possible. Maureen Battistella, volunteer extraordinaire for expertise, outreach, gas and time, and for day-long road trips and countless hours documenting the Southern Oregon wine industry, contributing immensely to the Wine of Southern Oregon collection. Thank you. MJ Daspit and Eric Weisinger for your book, Rogue Valley Wine. Which documents the history and current status of the Southern Oregon wine industry and for support of the Wine of Southern Oregon project. Dr. Porter Lombard, Professor of Horticulture at OSU Extension Service. For creating an experimental vineyard at the Southern Oregon Research and Extension Center, providing expertise, assistance, and cuttings to early grape growers in support of the Wine of the of Southern Oregon project. Dr. Greg Jones, climatologist. For internationally recognized contributions to the study of viticultural microclimates, grapevine phrenology, and viticultural suitability, and for ongoing support of the Hannon Library wine services or resources. Thank you. And Dr. Willard Brown, physician and winemaker. For significant research and efforts to preserve the history of Southern Oregon's grape growing and winemaking industry and the many contributions to Hannon Library's wine resources. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the members of the digital projects team here at Hannon Library. Clayton Sifley, who I think stepped out. Mary Hones, Mary Jane Cedarface, Shayna Sandor, Teresa Montgomery. In lieu of certificates, I'm going to make sure they get paid this month. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank the wineries that donated wine for this event. Agate Ridge Vineyard, Ledger David Sellers, Red Lily Vineyards, and the Weisinger Family Winery. I'd also like to thank our wine pourers. Dottie Arms. Dottie Arms is our government documents librarian and my predecessor in this position as university librarian, Paul Adalian. Thank you for coming and giving me a preview of what my retirement will look like. So two last things. Often an event like this culminates with the wrapping up of a collection. The project is done. We finished the last of our products that we're putting in. I would like this to be an ongoing collection. I would like to have the library continue to work with the generous wineries that have collaborated on this project to continue to bring new material to this collection so it continues to be a vibrant collection which will reflect the vibrant wine industry of Southern Oregon. Finally, I'd like to invite you to take a look at the Retzlaff Gallery where we have images from the digital collection as well as art from vineyard paintings from local artist Donna Jean Morris. Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.